Okay, this is Unit 10, Mr. Whipple here. I've got the War of 1812. Congress has declared war. What would the United States do first? Remember, they were fighting the British on both land and in Canada and at sea. The United States chose to begin fighting by sending William Hull to Canada. He took troops from Detroit across the border to fight the British. Unfortunately for the Americans, he met Sir Isaac Brock. Isaac Brock was a British general who had been in Canada since 1802. Canada was a British colony, and Brock worked hard at every place he was posted to train the militia and improve Canada's defenses. He rebuilt fortifications and trained the available men in fighting and defense. Much of the British force from Great Britain were busy fighting France and Spain. When the War of 1812 began, Brock was posted in Quebec. He needed all the men he had trained to fight and defend their land. He had also met Tecumseh, who joined forces with the British after losing the Battle of Tippecanoe. William Hull's troops had crossed into Canada, but he soon got word of an American defeat in northern Michigan. Hull decided to take his troops back to Detroit. Isaac Brock's troops and Tecumseh's warriors followed and demanded that Hull's troops surrender Detroit. Hull had no backup and was surrounded. He and his 2,000 troops surrendered without any fighting. It was the first loss for the Americans and made Isaac Brock a British hero. 2 months later, Isaac Brock would again lead his troops to victory, this time winning a battle at Queenston Heights. American troops had crossed into Canada from northern New York State, but were pushed back by Brock's British and American Indian troops. Brock was killed in this battle, but is still remembered today for his courage and leadership. In 1813, fighting continued in the north. The British and American Indians again beat the American troops in the Battle of Frenchtown in Michigan. Americans responded by capturing the city of York, which today is Toronto. The American soldiers burnt the city of New York. Later, the British would do the same thing to the Americans, burning cities in upstate New York and Washington, D.C. What was happening on the seas during this time? The British set up blockades, preventing any boats from going into or out of the United States. This prevented trade and supplies to and from the United States. The British Navy was far superior to the American Navy and were able to enter the Chesapeake Bay. From there, the soldiers captured Washington, D.C. and burned the Capitol and the White House. Again, this burning was in retaliation for the Americans burning York. The British then set their sights on Baltimore, hoping to end the war. For over 24 hours, they bombed Fort McHenry, which was Baltimore's protection. They were unable to take the fort and withdrew. They decided to move the fleet to New Orleans and come in from the south. All of this fighting was affecting not only the United States, but other countries as well. Countries in Europe had been at war in one way or another for over 20 years. The people were tired of war and ready for it to end. Leaders met in Ghent, Belgium, and negotiated a peace deal. Both sides agreed to stop fighting. The British promised to keep their Canadian borders the same and not try to expand in the United States. The Americans also agreed to try to expand their borders, agreed to not expand their borders further into Canada. Historians believe that there was no true winner of this war, since both countries kept the borders the way they were before the war started. There are many lasting impacts for Canada, the American Indians, and the United States. Canadians and the American Indians viewed the war as a turning point in their attempt to govern themselves. American Indians continued to be pushed further and further west, eventually forced to live on reservations. Canada did not become an independent country until 1867, about 50 years after the war ended. The War of 1812 is seen as a positive for the United States. It brought a sense of national unity to the country. It also encouraged the United States to continue their westward expansion. The end of the war also marked the end of the Federalist Party. The Federalists opposed the war and were now seen as unpatriotic. Historians believe the city of Ghent helped bring in a new era of good feelings amongst the different parties that would last until the Civil War.